Danelaw Saga, bringing Vikings back to the East Midlands, tells the story of the families and the ordinary people who came to the East Midlands, the people who settled here and shaped it. The exhibition also looks at how Vikings were rediscovered in the 19th century by various scholars, including local authors like the Howitts and Mellish.
The Vikings is a name we give to people of Scandinavian origin, so from the modern countries of Denmark, Norway and Sweden. These countries have always had contacts with the rest of Europe, but what happened in the 8th century is that their contacts intensified, and indeed very large numbers of people left the Scandinavian countries to head off east, south and west. Before the Vikings arrived, the East Midlands did not exist as an entity. It was part of the larger kingdom of Mercia, which included what we would call the West Midlands today as well. It was inhabited by people speaking mainly Old English who lived in small villages or on small farmsteads. The Vikings first started raiding in England in the late 8th century, but their main impact on the East Midlands came in the 9th century, in the 860s, when they raided throughout Mercia and camped at places like Torksey and Repton, and also came to Nottingham in the year 868, where they made peace with the locals, so apparently there wasn't a huge problem there. Once the Great Heathen Army had established itself in the East Midlands, then more people came and they spread out and settled throughout the rural areas. At the same time, the 5 boroughs of Derby, Leicester, Lincoln, Nottingham and Stamford became centres of the Danelaw, where the Vikings ruled. The Danelaw was a part of England where Viking law applied, and this was agreed between King Alfred and the Danish leader Gunthorpe, that in the Danelaw, which is an area in the east and the north of England, Viking laws would apply. And Anglo-Saxon laws applied in the rest of the country, and the Danelaw developed a slightly different legal and administrative structure which lasted well into the 11th century. In the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Viking army that came here in the 860s is described as the Great Heathen Army. We don't know how big it was, we don't know what they meant by the Great Heathen Army, but we do know that it must have been quite large. For example, at the winter camp in Torksey, there were probably between 1,000 and 5,000 people there. Not all of those would necessarily have been warriors. Some of them may have been women and children accompanying the warriors. The Vikings are normally associated with war and violence, and they certainly participated in their fair share of war and violence in a period when everyone was doing it, so they weren't the only ones sacking monasteries. We know that.
So the oldest things that are on display from the collections of Manuscripts and Special Collections are actually the deeds. They're from the medieval period, and they're actually some of the oldest things that we have in the collections as a whole, not just relating to the Vikings. One of the things that really interested me when we started working on this exhibition, and that I wasn't aware of, was just how much the Vikings have influenced the names and place names of the local area. So if you're looking at a medieval deed, it's a small piece of parchment, it's written in Latin, it's very difficult even, for someone who can read the language to really sort of understand what's going on. But then you sort of start picking it apart and you see these places like Gunthorpe, and before I was working on this exhibition, I know that Gunthorpe comes from Gunnhild, which is a Viking woman, or that actually what this deed shows is that Viking women could own farms in their own right, and that's essentially what this deed's telling us. So it's really interesting just to start picking apart these things and seeing that it's more than just a small piece of parchment with funny writing on it. It's actually telling the story of the past of the local area.
Well, the one thing that I'm very, very excited about in this exhibition are the textile tools which are associated with the camp and Torksey. They show us, apart from linguistic evidence, that not just men came over with the Great Army, but also women. We can see evidence for female industry, and that is really exciting. It may indicate that amongst these migrants, they are not just camp followers or just women who come over as part of a family group. We might have that in Torksey, But it may be that later migrations, and also here to the Midlands, were women who were setting up a business.
Not only were they arriving here, they were bringing items from far afield. From Torksey we have items like gold solidi from the Frankish kingdoms of France and Germany. We have trefoil brooches from Torksey and from Lincolnshire showing that women were wearing Viking style fashions. We have axes which play up to the traditional violent image of the Vikings. We have bits of hack silver, we have bits of broken scales that would have been used to weigh out the silver and the gold when they were trading. The Vikings used a bullion economy when they arrived in the East Midlands. This meant that instead of paying for something with a coin worth 1 penny or 1 shilling or whatever, they would pay for things by weight of silver or weight of gold. But we also find a yelling style artwork on the hogback grave cover from St Luke's Church in Hickling. A hogback is a type of grave cover of distinctively Scandinavian style, and this one is the most southerly one ever found, but it also has a cross in it, so this person is expressing their identity both as Scandinavian and as Christian.
Because we shouldn't forget that one aspect of female narration is also put in text onto textiles. This is a very overlooked aspect.
It's not generally recognized that Vikings were actually quite cultured and that they cultivated poetry, and they also had their own form of writing known as runes. And it's interesting that it's in the East Midlands that we find 3 runic inscriptions from the Viking age.
A really exciting artefact we've got in this exhibition is a reproduction of the Saltfleet B spindle whorl. Now, this is a spindle whorl which, appears a lot around the Viking and the Anglo-Saxon world, stuff you can see, stuff how people made their textiles on the upright loom. But what's exciting about it is it has a runic inscription, and it seems to be some sort of invocation.
For me, one of the most important pieces is just a simple lead gaming piece for board games. They've been found at Torksey in their hundreds. They show that ordinary everyday people were playing board games. Also, the spread of them shows that these Vikings, these ordinary people, were everywhere in the East Midlands. Grimsby in Lincolnshire has a place name that derives from the Old Norse personal name Grim and by meaning village or farm. The Middle English romance Havelok the Dane describes the origins of Grimsby, how the Danish fisherman Grim settled there and how he adopted Havelok, a young Dane, who then later went on to marry the Anglo-Saxon princess Goldborough. And it's also immortalised in the Great Seal of Grimsby, which features images of Goldborough, Grim and Havelok.
We also have a lot of printed books on display. One of the key ones is the Saga, which translates as the King's Saga, which is a key Icelandic text. And then we have lots of things from the Erica Benedict's juvenile collection, and this is a collection of works written in the 19th century, and they're there showing the Vikings to a new generation of children and trying to reimagine the Viking world for children and get them interested in it.
We have here some of the work that Joseph Mellish produced. And Joseph Mellish was born in Blyth, which is borderline Yorkshire and East Midlands, but he also moved over to Germany, where he became part of a German literary scene. He met some of the very important people who have been writing about Norse literature in Germany, and he definitely was influenced. But he's also incorporating, obviously, part of the history of the region where he came from, the idea of the Danelaw, of who these people were. And the interesting thing for me is that he is writing in German.
After the exhibition closes, the Manuscripts and Special Collections material will be heading back to Kingsmeadow campus, where we're based. Manuscripts and Special Collections is open to the public. Absolutely anybody can come and look at the material that we hold. So if you see anything in the exhibition that from our collections that you'd like to come and have a closer look at, then do please come and visit us after the exhibition finishes.